Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank very much this organizing committee that we just saw for inviting me to this wonderful school. So I'm very pleased to be here this week for very nice discussions with all of you. So today I'm going to talk about human-nature interactions using three metaphors which I have called contributions, attachments, and entanglements. In this presentation, I will talk about ecosystem services and also social ecological networks. It will be a little bit conceptual, but I'm going to use examples from my research. So why people-nature interactions? Because I think that most or all challenges that we face, locally or globally, are related to those people-nature interactions. For example, if we think of adaptation to climate change, especially nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation to climate change, the problem is the problem of impact of a global climate changing on a local system. Local system composed of a society and ecosystems. So we have greenhouse gases emission from the local system and impact on the other side from the climate to the local system. But inside the system, we have a lot of interactions. For example, local ecosystems can provide a protective role to local society. For example, urban forest will reduce temperatures during heat waves, which will reduce the impact of the heat wave on people. Local ecosystems such as wetlands can also regulate water to reduce the impact of floods and droughts. So there are many different ways those ecosystems contribute to adaptation of the society. In return, on the opposite, the society will manage those ecosystems, which can increase this protective role, but also decrease it. It can also change the greenhouse gas emissions by deforestation. So we have a lot of interactions in many ways that we need to understand the challenges and the solutions. So my talk will be framed in the context of social-ecological systems, which are defined as coupled human-natural systems. So in other terms, systems integrating societies and ecosystems. And those systems have been studied in many research projects. And I'm showing here three journals that for me are important because their titles include society and ecosystems. So it's like people and nature, ecology and society, and ecosystems and people. So those journals for me are the good place to publish research on social ecological systems. There are many ways of conceptualizing and analyzing those systems. And the way we frame the systems has many implications on what we observe and the kind of conclusion we can draw from the research. That's why I'm going to focus in this presentation on presenting and discussing different perspectives or framings of human-nature relationship and social-ecological system. So I'm going to present three. The first one, I called it contributions. It will be basically about ecosystem services. But so before I continue, I would like to know how many of you have already worked on ecosystem services. Okay, basically, let's say 50%, maybe less than 50%. So I'm going to explain a little bit what it means. I won't go into the details because I want to take more time for the two other perspectives. So the history of ecosystem services concept is started like more or less 30 years ago with like a book by Gretchen Daly on nature services. Then the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was very effective in using and disseminating this concept of ecosystem services. And the creation of the Ecosystem Services Journal. So, and then this concept evolved to something a bit different, but not so different, the nature's contributions to people, NCPs, which was proposed by IBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. We saw a presentation on IBES this morning. So ecosystem services have been integrated in many strategies of large NGOs, for instance, but also in many policies, national policies or EU policies. The idea with ecosystem services is that ecosystems provide different types of services, like the ones I show here as example, like provisioning services, for example, wood, regulating services, for example, water purification, and cultural services, such as landscape beauty. And those services flow to people who benefit from those services. So you already see that there is a metaphor of production, almost an economic metaphor, that on one side, there are ecosystems producing, and on the other side, people using. So this is a metaphor of supply and demand. So it's really like based in economics. So the strength of this ecosystem service approach is that it's kind of integrative. I'm going to show an example here from my research in Peru. So I lived 7 years in Peru, and we had several projects in a watershed. And the first of those projects was about ecosystem services. The project was implemented with scientists and students from Peru and Europe. And when we arrived there and we started to organize workshops, we convened a big workshop where we invited all sectors connected to ecosystem services. So we had people from the water sector, from the civil defense, health, national park for conservation, agriculture, tourism, transportation, and they were all related to ecosystem services. Like transportation sector was interested in ecosystem services for reducing landslides. The tourism sector was interested in ecosystem services because of landscape beauty and recreation. So they were all connected to ecosystem services. But it was the first time they were in the same room, actually. So they were happy to have this opportunity that with ecosystem services, they had the opportunity of talking to each other about the same place. So I think this integrative feature of the ecosystem service concept is interesting. Another strength is that the concept allows to analyze synergies and trade-offs. I'm showing an example here of a conversion from natural forest to agriculture, where in the forest we have a lot of recreation, wood, water regulation, carbon, but no food. And when we convert, we have a lot of food, but not of the rest, or very limited of the rest. So so the framework of ecosystem services can help understanding trade-offs, but also issues of environmental justice, because those trade-offs are associated with winners and losers. Some people will lose from the loss of water regulation, others will win from the increase in food production. So as a summary of this first part on contribution, I would say that the framing of ecosystem services is interesting. It's a way of framing human-nature relationships. It can be useful in some cases, but with a lot of limitations. We're going to see them. So I'm going to move on to the second part of this presentation on attachments. When we started this research in Peru, in addition to organizing those workshops on ecosystem services, we also had a project on understanding what how people perceived their place. So it was completely open. It was an open discussion with men and women, urban and rural people, young and less young, with different livelihood activities. And basically, they talked about their place. So we thought maybe what this will say will refer to ecosystem services. And yes, indeed, I mean, they talked about food, wood, water regulation, recreation, landscape beauty, and so on. But they also talked about a lot of different things that didn't fit into the ecosystem service framework. So I'm going to let you read. Can you read from the back of the room? Yeah? I'm going to let you read that. There's extracts from what people said about their place. So what do you think? Any reactions?
It sounds like my interviews from
Yes? Great.
Spain, Morocco, it's the same kind of.
Yes.
This attachment with nature and connection with the land.
Thank you. Yes?
There's a lot of spirituality in it.
Spirituality, definitely.
They can't really quantify it in any way.
Yeah, not possible to quantify.
The place attachment and like sense of identity.
Identity, sense of place. More comments? Yeah.
And the people value nature as well.
Yes, the values, yeah.
Sort of emotional connectedness to nature, which is related to mental well-being.
Exactly, emotional connectedness, yeah.
Memory.
And mental well-being, yeah.
Memory.
Memory, yeah. Yeah, a lot of elements that didn't fit well, Wolfgang.
There are also flowers that really stink.
So people, that's right. That's right, and people working on ecosystem services call this a disservice. Okay, so when we analyzed this information, we were really impressed by the amount of emotion and sensation also that were present in those statements. And so we realized that the literature on ecosystem services is really weak on that. I mean, almost doesn't say anything about that. And we analyzed this data using those dimensions that people mentioned a lot about the sensory experience, the smell of flowers, I mean all the 5 senses. The cognitive experience, so already processed, like talking about family memories and so on, but also the affective experience with the emotions, love, fear also, and many other emotions. So we thought that it was interesting to use different frameworks than the ecosystem service framework to understand those attachments. So I would like to go back to the ecosystem service framing that I presented before. So do you think the why the framing doesn't really work for that? Do you have any ideas or arguments? Yes?
Yeah, I understand, and I think it's very useful, but I think it's very, very limited because it is very detached from the basic ultimate truth, which is interdependence. Mm-hmm. So the nature of things doesn't have necessarily a purpose of service, which is a system we use for like electricity, like very human concept. So I think there's lots of limitations. So that's why it doesn't fit another part of the
yes, great.
I think for me, I see it as more intangible provisions of the ecosystem. So I see that it's still a provision service, but these are more intangible, and so in the way maybe the provisioning service is framed, it doesn't capture those intangible aspects.
Yeah, great, thank you. 2 more comments. Yeah.
I was just going to say, although I don't agree with this, I can see an argument for ecological, the ecological services being, if you're trying to implement something in practice, it seems easier to measure. And so I can see if you're coming to someone saying, look, all these people are talking about these emotions and stuff, they would prefer the other one. So I think that it's, also needs to, if you're using a different framework, there also needs to be the advocacy aspect of like helping people understand why the other parts are important too.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah. One last comment. Yeah.
I think it's great because it quantifies some of the things, but it also misses the emotional part of the landscape, which is also very important because it's what pushes the local communities to drive change. So when you do not study this part, and you miss a lot of things that will actually work towards the transformative change.
Exactly, yeah, great. Thank you very much for those comments. So I think that from what we have just seen, the ecosystem service framing doesn't work everywhere, especially this production metaphor. You have a dualism between nature and society, so the ecosystems are producing a service that will be used by society, so there is a clear separation, a dualism. It doesn't work in the case of those intangible relationships, like imagine landscape beauty. It's not that the forest will produce beauty and I will receive this beauty and I will enjoy it. Of course, I'm part of the production of the beauty because I define what is beautiful. So the dualism or the separation between nature and society doesn't work in this case. And also there is this, in the production metaphor, there is a focus on utilitarianism. So it's only what is useful, they say, that is valued in the framework of ecosystem services. And also, there is an issue of recognition justice. So we talked about justice just before. And recognition justice is about recognizing the different worldviews, the different knowledge, and so on. If we use an ecosystem service framing, we bring a Western-oriented framing. So it's not aligned to, for example, the cosmovision of local communities in the Andes. Of course, they don't work with this conceptualization. And so it reminds me also of the discussion we had before about the need for decolonizing science. Bringing such a framework in the research in the watershed in the Andes is a problem in terms of colonial science. And it's also, this recognition justice is also a question of values. The values that are highlighted with this framework are basically more instrumental values than relational or intrinsic values. I'm using here the typology of values defined by Ibes. Okay, so as a summary of this second part of my presentation, this ecosystem service framework cannot capture the diversity of intangible people-nature interactions, and they are very important, as you said. I mean, they determine our well-being, our attitude, our behaviors. So we are not driven only by materialist values from decision making. We are driven a lot by those intangible relationships. I've shown some example of them in the slide. Okay, so now I can move on to the last part of my presentation on entanglement. I would like to take a more holistic perspective because so far I've talked about relationships between people and nature. Okay, but social-ecological systems are not only that. There are many other relationships that matter, like relationships among people or social relationships, like collaboration, conflicts, because they drive or they determine what people do, how they determine also their well-being, but also their actions on ecosystems. And then there are nature or ecological relationships, like the flows of energy and material, predation, symbiosis. They are also important because they drive the resilience or the dynamics of the ecosystem, and so they also determine other relationships between people and nature. Okay, so we need to take this holistic perspective on different interactions or relationships. For this, we can take a systemic approach where we consider that the components of the system are in interaction and they can be connected directly or indirectly. According to the system thinking, the behavior of a system will be determined by the behavior of the component, but overall by the interactions between the components. It can lead to surprises or emergence. It means that the system can behave in a way that we could not predict because of this, the multiplicity of interactions between the components. This is related to what we can call relational thinking. So considering that the challenges and the solutions emerge from all those relationships between social systems, between ecological systems, and between the two systems. West et al. In 2020 has published a paper called A Relational Turn in Sustainability Science, and they emphasize the need to look more at the relationship between, within social ecological systems. To apply this relational thinking, we can build on a lot of other schools of thought that have worked on that. I'm thinking, for instance, of people working on people-nature connection or disconnection, and people working on social interactions in the co-production of societal change, people with more like a systems approach on social ecological system thinking or social ecological network, but also more philosophical on actor network theory or relational ontology by Escobar. So there are many schools of thought. Of course, it's difficult to combine them, but we can be inspired by them to dig into those relationships. I'm going to show an example of an application of that using social ecological network analysis. So it's basically that we use network theory to map the interactions among people, institutions, animals, plants, abiotic resources. And we are particularly interested in observing the structure of the network. Okay, so there is a lot of literature recently on social ecological network analysis. I'm going to show an example. It's an example from a research we have conducted in Burkina Faso about a specific tree called Nere. Though this tree is very important in ecological, social, and cultural terms, it provides multiple benefits for human health, for soil fertility. The list is very long. And people collect the seeds from this tree and they ferment them and produce those little balls that are used in cooking. So it's really nutritional. It has a very good flavor also. And the seed called sumbala are also very important culturally because they are used in rituals. They are used as a gift to visitors or gift to important people. And also there are complex rights and access requirements to go to the field where there is a tree, or to access the tree or to collect the seeds. You need special rights that are transferred within the social group. So a group of colleagues from Burkina Faso spent a lot of time in a research project on this tree. They collected a lot of information, and we used social ecological network analysis to kind of synthesize and summarize this information. And we tried to see if we could get insights about the system using network analysis. So what we did first is that we spent a lot of time drawing big diagrams with the different type of factors and the ecological elements. So during like many iterations, we had those drawings. So this one is clean, but we had a lot of dirty ones. And we tried to map the interactions between the tree, the soil, the livestock, so ecological interactions, but also interactions among people in the community regarding the tree, and also social ecological, so people acting on the tree or the tree benefiting or producing something to people. So then we started to organize a little bit at different levels, the land, the tree, the product, and to, it created a big network, social ecological network, and then we tried to extract sub-networks. I'm going to show you. So we found three main conclusions. First, the tree is a connector within the social ecological system. So thanks to the tree, there are a lot of crucial social ecological, social cultural relationships like transfer of rights, gift, counter-gift that take place. Those interactions would not be possible with a different tree. If a project decided to replace this tree by eucalyptus, for instance, then all those relationships would disappear. And those relationships took place between people of different ethnicity, genders, and ages. So that's why we called the tree a connector or a broker. So it's a little bit aligned with the definition of a cultural keystone species, but please refer to Vicky if you want to know more about cultural keystone species. She is the specialist. Okay, and then what we did is that we extracted sub-networks. So we looked only at the transfer of rights in purple, and then the action that people take when they have the right to do something. And we saw that the graph was really what we call the hierarchical, so from with people at the top sending rights to other people. At the top we have we had men from the dominant ethnic group. And then on the other side we see the cascade of benefits, so we see how the ecological element provide benefits that will flow into the social system. At the top, the the people at the top of this cascade were women. Okay, so we see that thanks to the tree, there is a circulation of right in the system and also a circulation of benefits. So the tree is a kind of a pump in the system. And finally, so they are the same graphs, but here what we observe is that people at the top here, at the top of the cascade of rights, have a kind of a power. So they transfer the right to other people. So they are more powerful here than at the bottom. On the other side, we have also, a question of power, with people at the top of the cascade of benefit having power to distribute those benefits to the seed, or the money, and so on, to other people. So it means that those cascades represent power relationships, and it's interesting that at the top here you have men, basically men, and men from the dominant ethnic group, and here we have women. And if we try to compare the power, so the position of the different actors, we see a negative correlation. So people having power on the right, on the cascade of rights, have less power on the cascade of benefits, and vice versa. Which means that the tree is a kind of stabilizer of the system. It is at the center of power relationships, and also counter-power. And so the tree is a kind of support for struggles and empowerment, especially of women. Okay, so as a conclusion of this case study, I would say that the tree is an actor of the system. We have seen that it's a connector, it's a pump, it's a stabilizer of social and social-ecological relationships. So I would like to discuss maybe after my presentation on this topic of non-human agency. How do we recognize that this tree as an agency, so a capacity to act on the system, not with the same intent as humans, of course, but still it has the power to change the system and to make the system evolve and live. As a conclusion, I would say I would like to remind that I've presented 3 perspectives. Among others, of course, there are many more. So 3 perspectives on the interactions between humans and the rest of the living world. So I've talked about contributions with ecosystem services. I've said that the concept is useful but limited. Then I've talked about attachment, where I focused on the intangible relations. And finally, I've talked about entanglement with social-ecological networks. I think that the framing that we use when we do a research on the social-ecological system depends on the issue, on the context, and of course the research question. So we can use different framings, but also different levels of resolution. Let's see this. I mean, if I work, like, for instance, on a forest, regulating water for a city. The social system is a city, and the ecological system is a forest. I can just consider 2 elements, the city as a whole and the forest as a whole, and understanding the interactions. But maybe I want to go more into the details of who is in the forest, in the city. So different people in the city. Can consider also different places in this forest. Okay, or in this watershed. Let's talk about watershed in general. Different places in the watershed, because they will provide maybe different benefits, okay? Then I can also look at the interactions, because maybe in the forest or in the watershed there will be flows of water that are important to understand. At the same time there will be flow maybe of money or power or interactions in decision making that are important to understand. So I can take this framing. But then I can go also to the whole picture where I consider that some people will act on a specific forest or a specific place of the watershed. So it gets more complicated, but depending on the context and the research questions, we may have to go to the more holistic perspective. But it's not always needed. And finally, those social-ecological frameworks are kind of metaphors that develop our capacity to investigate. When we use those frameworks, we can open our perspective to different elements that we had not considered at the beginning. But at the same time, they can also be restrictive. They can confine us to utilitarian or anthropocentric views, as I showed with the case of ecosystem services. So it's important to be aware, to be also self-reflexive on the way we use the framings. And finally, those frameworks are kind of narratives about the world, and so they have a political loading. They are not neutral. The way we frame a social ecological system is politically oriented, so we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware that the frameworks have a political role, and maybe they can be transformative in some cases, but let's stay aware of this, this political loading. Thank you.